the Criterion. It's the Criterion. 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 N. Project. Hi everybody, welcome to the Criterion Project. I am Conrado Falco, and I am here as usual with the wonderful Rachel Wagner.
Hi!
Hey Rachel.
Yes.
Today, Rachel and I are going to be talking about... We're actually going to take a train to Barcelona because we are talking about Pedro Almodovar's All About My Mother. So, tell me, Rachel, have you always depended on the kindness of strangers?
Definitely. As a single person, I am actually, I think, more reliant upon my community, I would say, than because I don't have my own family. So you kind of have to reach out. So
great.
Yeah.
I think it's a very interesting movie about creating your own family in a way. So before we get into it, we just want to give a little shout out to our friend Michael Lorette, who created the wonderful theme song for our program and who has now uploaded a couple of singles of his own to SoundCloud. So it would be great if you guys want to give him a listen. They're pretty catchy songs. I feel like they're a bit of a Latino Ed Sheeran sort of vibe to them. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can go to SoundCloud. His name on there is Michael __ Lorette, and that's spelled Lloret.
Yeah, and we'll put a link in the description if you want to, for you to check that out.
Yeah. So check out those songs. Before we get into the movie itself, Rachel, should we talk about what we've been watching on the Criterion channel this month?
Yeah, I had a jam-packed month in July, and so I was just able to watch one of the Ginger Rogers, Fred Astaire movies, and I watched Top Hat, and we'll talk about that a little later, but it was really a really fun, bubbly, romantic comedy with great music and dancing, and so that's going to speak right to my heart, and I really enjoyed it. It was great.
Great. I have not been watching as many movies that I would like on the channel, partially because I am watching a lot of 1999 movies in preparation for possible future episodes. But what I have seen is that they have put a bunch of new movies up this month, and one of them is, which I think is one of the best movies I have ever seen, and that's called Aguirre, The Wrath of God. And it's a movie by Werner Herzog, who was a German director, but he went down to the Amazon in South America to film this movie about sort of a conquistador who kind of is trying to find El Dorado and goes crazy. And it's a very strange movie, but also very intense and very funny. It's kind of like no movie I have ever seen. It's very dark, but it's totally unique, and it really spoke to me when I saw it. I really love it.
Is it a documentary by Herzog or a
No, it's a fiction film. It's it takes place in I guess that would be the 16th or 17th century, and it's so it's this group of Spaniards who are coming to the jungle trying to find gold, and the guy who leads them, Aguirre, is this sort of totally nuts guy played by Klaus Kinski, and he really goes insane. It's kind of a bit of like a Heart of Darkness, Apocalypse Now sort of situation.
I haven't heard of that one. That sounds good. I love Werner Herzog, so
yeah, it's pretty out there. But yeah, give it a try, everyone who's interested. I think it's a great movie.
Cool. That sounds good. Very good. So this movie that we're talking about today, All About My Mother, was 1999. Do you anticipate it? Do you think would make your top 10 list?
Oh, definitely. Actually, I feel like it's probably going to be near the top, if not at the very top of my list. I really love this movie. So let's get into it. Let me tell you a little bit about it. It obviously came out in 99, and so it's its 20th anniversary. And at the time, it was a bit of a departure for Almodovar, who was well known for doing sort of either sort of zany comedies or very pulpy sex thrillers. So this movie was much more, I guess, it had a different vibe, right? It's much more sentimental. It feels much more, in a way, personal and honest, and it's much softer and warm than any movie that he had done up to that point. And it really sort of put him in a different level for his trajectory. It made him a bit of a star in the world, if maybe not also in the US to a degree, but I feel like internationally he became a really big director. I remember growing up in South America, there was a time when the only directors that people knew by name were Tarantino and Pedro Almodovar, right? It was like the two cool directors that everyone wanted to see their new movies. So yeah, and I definitely was one of those people, and he became a big part of my falling in love with movies and etc. And Lullaby by My Mother was definitely one of those movies.
You had seen it before.
I have seen it before a couple times actually, and I really love it. So I took the opportunity, since it was going to be on the channel, to talk about it, because I love Almodovar in general, and because this is his 20th anniversary. It seemed perfect.
Cool.
Although I should say, this is the first time that we're doing a movie that's on the Criterion channel, but it's technically not a Criterion disc. I didn't know that until I was looking stuff up for the episode. So that's a little interesting. And,
I've learned, because I was working on some of the graphics yesterday, and I realized that as well. I'm like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder why.
Yeah, but I think because Almodovar has a new movie coming out that it's supposed to be really great, they put up all his movies. Well, not all, but a lot of his movies up in the channel. And most of them are actually leaving on August 31st. So if people like what we're talking about in this episode and want to catch up with Almodovar, they should take the opportunity before they take them down.
Yeah. That's interesting. So this is my second Almodovar film that I have seen. I watched Talk to Her for my Blind Spot project over on my blog a couple of years ago. I've been doing that for quite a while now. It was in my first batch of my first year of Blind Spot, and I liked Talk to Her. I gave it a very positive review, but I actually think I prefer this because I don't know. I'm not super like in this like surrealism. Like I prefer more traditional narrative if I had to pick. I still can appreciate it and still enjoy it, but this is more traditional narrative, so I think it's more my taste. So anyway, yeah, it had a lot of interesting things about it, but just as far as the storytelling was a little more traditional, I would say.
Why don't we talk about what the movie is about? Do you want to give a little, very brief plot description to the listeners?
Sure. Yeah. So it's about this woman named Manuela who, at the beginning of the film, her son, she has a son. She's a single mother, and her son passes away from a car accident or getting hit by a car. He had been really kind of obsessed with this actress who is in Streetcar named Desire. He wanted to be a writer, her son, and so she goes after she goes back to Barcelona, where she had gotten pregnant, and to try to find the father and tell him about their son. And it turns out the father is a transgendered woman, she ends up meeting a bunch of characters in Barcelona, ends up living there, ends up meeting this nun who actually ends up leaving the calling, I guess, because she ends up pregnant by also the same person who is the father. So they end up having the same father to their child. Anyway, and
yeah,
and so that's basically, and they end up kind of helping each other in a sort of the story that way.
Yeah, very good.
Is that pretty good?
Yeah, I think that was pretty good. I mean, another thing that happens all the time in Almodovar movies is very complicated plots in which one thing leads to another, and there's a bunch of characters, and they have all this, like it's worth mentioning too that the reason the son dies at the beginning of the movie is because he wants to get an autograph from the actress that he loves so much, right? And then Manuela goes to Barcelona to try to find the father, but then she ends up, it turns out the Streetcar Named Desire is touring, and now it's not performing in Barcelona, so Manuela goes to see it, and she ends up meeting the actress and working for her. So a lot of things are going on in the movie. If I had to summarize it in a one sentence plot description, I would describe it as women helping each other. And that's kind of what I feel the movie is all about. It's all these women who are in many ways pretty lonely and sort of finding comfort in each other during hard times, right? Manuela with her the passing of her son, and then Rosa, who's the nun, played by very young Penelope Cruz in the movie. She's pregnant, and she's also finds out that she's sick with AIDS later on, and so the actress herself, Uma, she's in a relationship with an addict, and like all these women, they kind of come together, and that's what I love about the movie, how they just really help each other and are there for each other.
Yeah, that's very true. I definitely has that sense of sort of non-traditional family, and it's a pretty, I feel like this kind of movie could have easily gone into cynical territory, but I think it actually is kind of not cynical because of all the help that they're giving, and also I think because of characters like the Agrado character, and her just owning who she is and being so positive, like particularly that scene where she talks about her all the different operations and stuff that she's had. That whole scene is, I don't know, I feel like, at least, I mean, there's I guess a bittersweetness to it, but I feel like it's actually very positive.
Yeah,
scene.
Definitely. I think that is one of the big important centerpiece scenes in the movie, right? In which Agrado, who is also a transgender woman, and she's been working as a prostitute for a long time, talks about the performance of A Streetcar Named Desire has to be canceled, and then she goes up on stage and says to the people in the audience that instead of going home, they can listen to her story of her life, and she talks about all the operations that she has had in order to become a woman that she wanted to be. And I think it's really touching, and also really important to the movie's themes, what she says at the end of her monologue. You're more authentic the more you resemble what you've dreamed of being. Talking about her body and her relationship to the body, and the relationship to what you want to be and the person that you want to be versus what the world is telling you should be. And I think that's also something that we see in the other characters in different ways, in sort of the way they find their own family, right? And they have to cope in their own ways.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I agree. So I had, I guess, two major sort of questions coming out of this movie that I thought I would ask you for your thoughts. Mm-hmm. First one I had is that I felt like I wondered if making Lola, I understand why Agrado is transgendered, but I felt like making Lola transgendered, I didn't really understand what that did to serve the story, because I don't know, it felt a little like, are they just doing this to be edgy, to be different? Because I felt like the story would have been exactly the same if Lola had been a man. What are your thoughts? Why do you think they did that?
Well, I don't know. I think Lola is a very interesting character. Lola is, by the way, I don't know if we've made this clear, but she is the father of Manuela's child, right? And she was once, right, and Rosa's child, and she once Manuela's husband, and but she is transgender now. And when we see her in the movie towards the end, and I think it's definitely a deliberate choice to make her transgender, one, but also to have her be played by a male actor, right, dressed up as a woman, because Agrado is played by a transgender actress. So I think there's definitely a choice there, and I think I don't know if this might be a little problematic now in the way that we understand transgender identity compared to 1999, but I do feel like Almodovar is trying to say something about being a woman and truly embracing the femininity of being a woman, which might be a bit of a thorny idea, but I do think the movie is really a love letter to femininity and womanhood and the sort of nurturing characteristics that we associate with that, right? Because the dedication at the end of the movie, which is also, I think, a lovely dedication, he says, "To Betty Davis, Gina Rowlands, Romy Schneider, to all actresses who have played actresses, to all women who act, to men who act and become women, to all people who want to become mothers, to my mother." And I think, so that's basically the text that comes up at the end of the movie, and I think it really sums up, I think this is basically Almodovar, I feel, as a gay man, is writing this love letter to all the women that he saw as role models and who taught him an alternative to being a straight man and being masculine and and repressing emotion and all the things that we associate with those things that we don't with womanhood, right? So I think that's kind of what he's trying to say, and I guess that's why I would say he decided to paint the Lola character that way. At the same time, he's very generous towards Lola, even if, we hear about her during the movie and everyone's saying like how she's this force of nature and this person who just does whatever they want and don't really look at the consequences. So she's painted a little bit as a villain, but when we finally meet her, it's actually very, it's a very sympathetic moment, and you can feel for all this stuff that she's going through also. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't completely let her off the hook for her behavior.
Oh, absolutely not. She does some horrible things. Yeah.
But I mean, and I guess, and granted, at least with Manuela, she didn't know, about the baby, and so it's a little, I mean, it's not her fault in that case. But with Rosa, it feels a little, especially because there's a big age difference, and some of the things that's a little bit like, what were you doing there? But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just felt, I felt a little confused by the choice, but it wasn't like a deal breaker or anything. But I was just kind of left puzzled, if that makes sense, about why that was done, and kind of part of me wondered if it was just because it's 1999 and you want it to be sort of shocking for that time period.
I mean, it could be. It could be because, Almodovar, by that point, he had made a reputation for being shocking. You look at his earlier movies and they all have a lot of sex and sexual stuff, and, stuff about community like gay and transgender and like all sorts of things that were not in the mainstream, let's say, of Spain back then. And this movie actually feels much less shocking than anything else. So I think that's why I think it's not just about that in this case. I think he must have been trying to say something about it.
Interesting. And we should note that this won the Oscar for a foreign language film.
Yeah,
that year. So anyway, that's kind of exciting. And and so my other question was, why pick Streetcar Named Desire? Why do you think they did that?
Well, I have there's a couple of movies that are referenced. Obviously, the title "All About My Mother" comes from "All About Eve," which Manuela and her son are watching at the beginning of the movie. And then there's this whole thing about performing Streetcar Named Desire. And I think it was important for him to have characters who are actresses in the movie, because I feel like, talking about all the women who inspired him, I feel like he has been very inspired by Hollywood actresses that he saw growing up, right? So it's a bit of a tribute to them. Why specifically Streetcar Named Desire? I think it's a more open-ended question, and I don't know if I have a super clear answer, except that I do think that line, "I've always depended on the kindness of strangers," sort of applies to the women in the movie, right? They're all helping each other, basically, in ways that even when they don't know, they are sort of helping. You know, when Manuela starts working for Uma, the actress who's playing Blanche in the performance, the actress doesn't know who Manuela is, and she doesn't know that her son died trying to get her autograph. But there's still she's still helping Manuela in a way without knowing it. And so it happens like that for a lot of characters in the movie.
Yeah. I think the reason why they picked it is, I mean, first of all, if you want if you want to pick a play that's really an actor's play, like it's a pretty good one, Streetcar Named Desire. You know, it has a lot of chewing up the scenery kind of moments. So if you wanted to pick something that, especially that would inspire sort of a young teen, but then also, I mean, if you wanted to, like, Stanley is such an alpha, especially as portrayed by Marlon Brando in the movie, that does paint a pretty big contrast between the characters of the movie.
Yeah, totally. And also the actor who plays him in this movie, he has a scene in which he's trying to, asking Conrado about, like, her past as a sex worker and trying to get, in bed with her or whatever. So he also comes off as a bit of a doofus and a very sexual, non-caring being compared to the other women around him.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point. I think it does make a reflection in that show that is so much about him not having any patience for the women in his life, right? And being so impulsive and so violent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a good point.
Interesting. Yeah. Did you have any things that you that made you think about the choices they made?
Well, I like I said, I do love this movie, and I have a lot of things to talk about it. But I think the main takeaway for me is that idea of a love letter to women and to womanhood, and it's something that it's a theme that I find very touching and very useful. As when I was growing up, I was never the most aggressive, and I was not into sports or anything like that. So even though I am a straight man, I do identify with a lot of female qualities and attributes, and I do appreciate all the women in my life who have been very kind to me in raising me and in showing me who I am. So I really connect with that part of the movie, and I feel like some of the women in this movie, I sort of recognize in women that I grew up with. Maybe it's a language thing, I don't know, but I identify a lot with it, and I think cool. I think the key moment for me in the movie that makes it all click to make together, other than the dedication at the end, is when Manuela and Rosa are waiting for the doctor, and they're talking about women and men, and Manuela says women will do anything to avoid being alone, and then Rosa responds, well, women are more tolerant, but that's good. And I feel like that's kind of what the movie is talking about, right? Like, these things that we see as weaknesses in men are actually strengths, and we think women are weak, but actually they're very strong, and they have all these amazing qualities, and that's what I like about it.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Very true. So I guess we should talk about the pretentiousness.
Yeah, why don't we talk about why do you think this is a Criterion film? That's our first question of the day.
Yeah, it's interesting because I guess it's not really a Criterion film, but
right, semi-Criterion film.
Semi-Criterion film. I think that it's it's got enough sort of edge to it, I think, to be a natural kind of fit for Criterion, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's also, in my opinion, he's such an important filmmaker and such a unique filmmaker too. And we didn't really talk too much about the filmmaking itself, but there are a couple things here. I mean, there's the dialogue, which I speak Spanish, it's my first language, so I don't know I feel like it translates pretty well into English, but I just have to say, when you hear it in Spanish, he has such a way of phrasing things for his characters that is just so funny. But I don't know if I think some of the lines are still funny in English, but when I watch one of his movies, when people say things that are not jokes, I still think that they're saying them in a funny way, and I don't really know how to explain it, but I guess that's something that just the kind of thing that gets lost in translation for movies.
Maybe kind of witty.
Yeah, I guess it's witty, and it's just such an attitude. I don't know, it's like a very Spanish attitude of like saying things in a certain way. Yeah, I guess that's the best way to put it. Yeah,
I can understand that.
Yeah, you have to think of how, like when I was growing up, I would see a movie and I wouldn't really recognize that someone had like a Texas or Southern accent, but the jokes still worked for me. But it's something that until I learned English, I was missing that extra thing, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's true to life because, most of us, even in the tough times of our life, hopefully at least, are still I don't know, there's a survival mechanism of still trying to laugh and still trying to kind of cheer each other up.
Totally. Yeah, just because you're sad doesn't mean that funny things stop happening. And I feel like that's definitely something that happens in my life. And you can see it definitely in Agrado as a character, just because she has such a keep on the sunny side of life energy to her, right? Despite anything that happens, she's always ready to make a joke. And it does feel like it's a defense mechanism for her and a survival tactic that she's developed over the years too.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so I think those are all reasons for it to be on the Criterion channel, at least.
Yeah. Definitely, and the colors and I feel like the production design and the costumes and the color red is all over this movie. It's he makes very beautiful movies in my opinion, and I think the colors in this are wonderful. I noticed this time how almost all of the women wear a lot of red or have red hair, and the big poster of Streetcar Named Desire is all red, and there's red coats. I feel like it's this thing of like the blood that connects them, that they're like a family even though they're not family.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so with all that in mind, why don't you tell me where do you think this ranks in the pretentious scale, which is where we rank a movie. We determine how pretentious it is, and if it's pretentious but worth it, or not pretentious but also like a little artsy. So what do you think?
I would say, I guess, I think I don't think it is that. I think it's not pretentious, but a little artsy. I guess I'll say that. I'll get out of that. Yeah, I don't think it's too abstract, too pretentious. Like I said, compared to Talk to Her, this is way more abstract. And so I don't know. I feel like it's relatively approachable. Most of its edgy choices are in some of the character choices. Some things. As far as the narrative, it's pretty approachable.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's pretty approachable, and I think that's kind of why it became such a breakout hit for him, and made him, audiences noticed him in a way they hadn't before. I would agree with you. I think it's and I think that's part of what makes him connect with people, is that it's artsy and it's different, but it's not completely pretentious and completely unapproachable. I think he likes fun, melodramatic movies, so he makes his movies have a lot of twists and turns and things that happen, and jokes and stuff.
Yeah. Very good. 100%. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So great. Any final thoughts? I mean, I love the movie, I said, but what about you? Who would you recommend it to?
I mean, it's definitely R-rated, so I would, recommend it for adults. But yeah, I mean, I feel like I would for people that can handle, some of the more mature themes. I think I would really recommend it to them. I think it's a really good movie, and like I said, it's very positive. So that would help me to, I think, recommend it over, like, even something I was thinking about it compared to Roma. Like, I loved Roma. It was really good, and it was positive in its own way. But I don't know. I feel like something like this, I'd almost recommend to more people. Like, I feel like I would be more particular about who I'd recommend Roma to, whereas this, I feel like I could recommend it to a wider group of people, because it is just, I don't know, it's just not as, I'm going to rip your heart out and stomp it on the ground kind of thing. It's like, if that makes sense.
No, totally. It's a very emotional, but I guess it's a very heartfelt movie, and it's very warm, and it's very, like, loving to all of its characters. And yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I would recommend it to anyone who is an adult and feels like they can handle it, especially to all the men out there. Take a look at it and see. Maybe it'll make you appreciate women in a way you hadn't before, like it kind of did me. So
yeah. For next month, I am going to go ahead and pick one of the Astaire Rogers films. And I kind of went back and forth on which one to pick. And I think I'm going to go with the one that I watched actually this month, because it is a classic. And I think I'm going to go ahead and watch all of them. So I would encourage everybody to do the same if you have the Criterion channel. But we're going to talk about Top Hat from 1935, Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, and it's just a delightful romantic comedy, and with great dancing, great music. So I think it's going to be fun and to talk about.
Excellent. I'm very excited. I have actually never seen a Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers movie. I've seen Fred Astaire before, but never the two together, and they're such an iconic pair, so I'm really excited. And I'm sure it's going to be really funny, and the music is going to be great, and the dancing is going to be incredible. So yeah, I can't wait.
So that'll be really fun for September. And so, yeah, I think that'll be great.
Yeah. Great. So why don't we say goodbye and tell people where they can find us on the internet?
Yes. So you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all over social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yep, and you can find me mostly on Twitter at Coco Hits New York. I also have a blog, which is cocohitsny.wordpress.com, and I recently wrote about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, so you can check that out. And you can also find me on Letterboxd, Conrado Falco.
Great. And so, yeah, check that out and let us know what you think. If you've seen any of Almodovar's films, what are your favorites? And if you have seen All About My Mother, what did you think of it and the choices they made? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section or over on Twitter. That would be really great. So let us know.
Absolutely. Yep. And I'll see you next time where we're tap dancing to Fred and Ginger.
Yes, that would be great. Bye.
Bye.